Fide.email, you don't need to compromise faith to participate in the modern world. Instead of pushing ads and invasive practices that conflict with Catholic values, we built Fide to reclaim technology for Christendom. When you use Fide.email, you declare your commitment to technology that defends Christian tradition. Join Fide.email today and use technology to advance Christendom.
They say there's a great sort of vibe shift, to use the colloquial description of it, going on in the West at this time. Some of us noticed this really in the months before the presidential election, but it became obvious afterwards. And it became more obvious when news started coming out that across the Western world, there were relatively historic numbers of catechumens and other candidates coming into the church at the Easter Vigil masses. Some staggering numbers of people in some places, including in France and most parts of the United States. And even anecdotally, my own viewers were reporting that, yes, they were seeing that their OCIA, as they call it now, classes were much larger than they had been in previous years. We've seen this so-called vibe shift in a lot of other ways too, but the election of the new Roman pontiff may actually be part of that as well. Something to think about as we talk about the story, because one of the things that I think kicked off this shift was the turning away of the culture from general neutrality or even acceptance of that sin and associated lifestyle that Father James Martin has an unhealthy interest in for a Catholic priest. Americans and Westerners in general tolerated this for a long time. And then that toleration of it became a bigger problem when big businesses started really shoving the whole stuff down everybody's throat. You started seeing this bigger problem with Target and a whole lot of other big brands. Suddenly, whenever a certain month of the summer rolls around, next month, from when you're watching this, just a couple of weeks from now, you suddenly would have all these businesses celebrating that James Martin stuff under the guise of the first deadly sin. They would adopt its imagery, the satanic flag that goes along with it, all of it. They would engage in all of it. And even to the shock and dismay of many Catholics, Pope Francis would write a personal letter of congratulations and thanks for his service to Father James Martin, a handwritten letter. He did it for every year for at least 3 years in a row, that James Martin would then publish on his own website. I know, I reported on them when they happened. My money is that's not going to be happening moving forward, but there's a vibe shift happening, and here's your latest example of that. So we go here to the Washington Post with this headline. We have to be careful how we talk about this, of course. Big brands distance themselves from first deadly sin events amid inclusion rollback. James Martin type celebrations coast to coast are facing funding shortfalls as corporate sponsors cut back, and ever backers are electing to be silent partners. Now that's interesting. Silent partners. The companies that do it don't want to be advertised as supporting it. Which begs a question. Why are you supporting it if you don't want to be associated with it? Because a lot of the things, these brands that are supporting it but trying to be silent partners, their association will come out anyway, so to speak, because most of these organizations throwing these public events are nonprofit organizations, and they have, as nonprofits, they have to file all their expenses and where all their money comes from with the IRS. The government needs to know where this is. It's a legal requirement, meaning you can go through their numbers and find who gave them that money. And so, I don't know, if Ford was giving money for this, you'd find out pretty quickly. Here are the details. Again, having to be careful about this. Quote, Marty Zuniga, who helps organize the James Martin type festival in St. Louis, one of the Midwest's biggest of these celebrations, could tell by January that this season would be unlike any he's seen. That's when Zuniga noticed that corporate contacts weren't answering his emails. In the weeks that followed, longtime partners like the Big Beer Company declined to sponsor this year's 2-day festival while others slashed donations, leaving him with a massive gap in his budget. Meanwhile, he told the Washington Post several companies willing to commit financially also asked him to keep their names out of it. The rationale was consistent, Zuniga said. We still want to support you, but we can't scream it from the rafters. The Trump administration's targeting of these inclusion initiatives, companies are distancing themselves from the first deadly sin, a celebration of strangeness that began in the 1970s following a certain activities and protests and now spans scores of cities across the planet. Intent on staying out of the government's crosshairs, many big brands are backing away from these celebrations of all sizes. As part of a broader rollback of inclusion efforts, leaving organizers from coast to coast, including from marquee events in San Francisco, New York, and the Midwest, with budget shortfalls, at a time when most are anticipating higher turnout, as well as facing heightened safety and logistical challenges. These organizers say they're worried the administration's antipathy towards confused people and those who don't realize what they should be wearing could make their events a magnet for hate against the broader James Martin type group. Such crimes were already on the rise before President Trump returned to office in January. The FBI data shows, with 1 in 5 crimes motivated by an anti-James Martin bias. Not only losing sponsorship dollars, we're having to spend away more on security, said Zuniga, president of the nonprofit First Deadly Sin St. Louis. This year's First Deadly Sin Fest will be encircled by 6-foot fencing, and Zuniga rented a nearby parking garage simply so he could shut it down. He said he wanted to ensure it cannot be used as a vantage from which to inflict violence on festival goers. It's very scary times. These pullbacks come as companies reassess the extent to which they want to weigh in on social issues, said Luke Hartig, who counsels Fortune 500 companies and other large employers as president of Gravity Research, with many opting to focus on matters strictly related to their business amid intensifying legal and political scrutiny on such programs. Firms are concerned about attracting government scrutiny and attention from conservative activists such as Robbie Starbuck, whose online campaigns have pressured brands such as Boeing, Caterpillar, Toyota, Molson Coors, and Tractor Supply to revise their inclusion policies. The First Deadly Sin has become a particular point of anxiety in the past couple of years, Hartig said, as executives took notice of how some brand efforts to embrace the James Martin crowd backfired. End quote. The article goes on to give you all the examples that you can think of from big events that happened in the past year, including that one big beer brand a couple years ago. And they can't figure out what's going on. They think this is about just government scrutiny. This is not just government scrutiny. People snapped. You might be kind of have noticed that most every movie that comes out now flops at the box office. Virtually every single one, because of political messaging. You may have noticed that sports attendance in most places is abysmally low for the same reasons, because they were all virtue signaling this way. People snapped. They got tired of pretending they were okay with things they were not okay with. And they were tired of having corporate America and, government pushing this stuff down their throat. So what was the response? They started buying other products. They stopped buying some things altogether. Made easier, of course, because of the economy. And many of them turned to God. Because in a mad world, what is the one place you can find stability? And that is in the loving arms of Jesus Christ and his church. There is a vibe shift happening, folks, to use the common parlance. And we need to be ready for that. We need to embrace that as Catholics. We need to be a little braver about having those conversations with our neighbors. Jesus commands us to go forth and to all nations and baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, teaching them all he taught us. That means bringing them into the church. Embrace this opportunity. We don't know how long it'll last. I take this story, though, broadly speaking, as good news. And I would love to know what Father James Martin has to say about that. You may have noticed he's been remarkably quiet about the new pope and his stance on those things, because as I covered for you earlier this week, it turns out the new pope had some spicy things to say about that entire subject like 15 years ago. I'd love to know what James Martin has to say about the state of things. But I'm curious what you think about this, so let me know in the comments, please. So like and subscribe if you haven't. Absolutely helps. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.